Welcome, everyone. So, this is a workshop, which means you're going to have to work. And can I give you your instructions for working? What we're going to do in this hour is I'm going to talk for a few minutes, and then I'm going to have you talk, because we know, this is proven by research in adult education, that adults learn more when they're talking than when they're listening. By the way, you're laughing. They also learn more when they're laughing than when they're not laughing. So talking and laughing, you really learn a lot. And so here's what will happen. I'll talk for a little while, and then I'm going to give it to you. Here's what I'm going to ask you to do. I'm going to ask you, not now, but I'm going to ask you to get in a group of 2 or 3. Now, earlier you saw that I had trouble with 2 and 4, but here's what I know, that if you have 4 people, you can be 2 groups of 2. And I'll ask you to stand up, and in groups of 2 or 3, I'm going to give you about 3 to 4 minutes to talk. And I'll give you a specific question, and then here's what will happen. It'll be a little bit loud in here because everyone will be talking, and then you'll hear me say, whoever is speaking now, when you finish your sentence, could you be seated? And at that point, guess what you do? You're seated and you don't talk, right? And because we're going to do this about 6 times, if we can get good at this by the 2nd time, the whole hour will go great. Is that a deal? All right, fantastic. We're talking about centering social action in contemplation and vice versa. And especially we're thinking about the relationship between social activism and the path of descent. And if you're interested in these slides, as earlier, I'll put them on my website next week, brianmclaren.net. And some people like to take pictures of slides, whatever you want to do, but don't feel pressure to take notes. There's some really juicy quotes I'm going to use, again, from Howard Thurman, because I just feel he's a treasure we all should know about in this world. But we're going to have 6 conversations in this hour on silence, centering, connection, focus, descent, and joy. And I'd like to start with silence. Obviously, the contemplative path is about a pursuit of peace, especially inner peace through inner stillness and silence. We all know what it's like to have that monkey mind chattering away at us all the time with the latest anxiety, outrage, resentment, fear, or whatever. And it is a great gift to learn to bring stillness and silence. But here's the problem. As Dietrich Bonhoeffer said, silence in the face of evil is itself evil. Not to speak is to speak, not to act is to act. And Dr. King said, in the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. There is a kind of contemplative spirituality that is really about personal peace and to hell with everybody else. It's a kind of contemplation that in some ways is saying, I've learned how to take a vacation from all the stresses of the world to keep myself happy. It's a little bit like building your own private gated community. And we need a kind of spirituality that puts together developing that inner peace to prepare us to go become the blessed peacemakers that Jesus spoke about in this world. That's why Father Richard often says the most important part of the name Center for Action and Contemplation is that word "and." The real challenge is, how do we integrate the action and the contemplation? How can we bring those together? Now, one way to think about it is to say they're 2 separate and discrete things with some amount of overlap. That's a good way to look at it. But as Barbara Holmes said in Joy Unspeakable, contemplative practices can be described as a protective membrane to hold the community in safety during the crisis of overt communal oppression and individual angst. And this idea of contemplation is almost like a force field within which we operate as agents for justice, peace, and joy in this world. I think that's a better way to think about this. And so in just a minute, I'm going to ask you to stand up, and in groups of 2 or 3, I'm going to ask you to talk about your own life. How do you integrate action and contemplation in your own life? Action meaning action for the common good, action for social justice, political justice, environmental justice, economic justice, the well-being of all of our neighbors and all of God's creation. How do you integrate that kind of action and contemplation in your life? And how do you feel about it? How satisfied are you with how that's going? And where would you see a need for change? It's kind of your personal weather report as we begin this session. So are you ready? You're going to have about 3 minutes to talk with one or maximum two other people, to speak and listen. Please, right now. Thanks. Whoever's speaking now, when you finish your sentence, please have a seat. You all are really good. So, there's this integration between the life of silence and the life of contemplation and the life of being willing to speak up and stand up, put your skin in the game, put your body on the line, put your feet on the street. But that's not to minimize the value of the contemplative life, especially for the people who are on the street. And Howard Thurman, in a beautiful book called Meditations of the Heart, wrote about this. And rather than me just read it, I know some of you, maybe you're too far back to read this, but those of you who are close enough to read it, I wonder if we could read this as a shared meditation. It's so beautifully put, and I bet as you read it, it will help you internalize it even more. So let's read it aloud together. How good it is to center down, to sit quietly and see oneself pass by. The streets of our minds seethe with endless traffic. Our spirits resound with clashings, with noisy silences, while something deep within hungers and thirsts for the still moment and the resting lull. With full intensity we seek, ere the quiet passes, a fresh sense of order in our living, a direction, a strong, sure purpose that will structure our confusion and bring meaning to our chaos. We look at ourselves in this waiting moment, the kinds of people we are. The questions persist. What are we doing with our lives? What are the motives that order our days? What is the end of our doings? Where are we trying to go? Where do we put the emphasis, and where are our values focused? For what end do we make sacrifices? Where is my treasure, and what do I love most in life? What do I hate most in life? And to what am I true? Over and over, the questions beat in upon the waiting moment as we listen, floating up through all the jangling echoes of our turbulence. There is a sound of another kind, a deeper note which only the stillness of the heart makes clear. It moves directly to the core of our being. Our questions are answered, our spirits refreshed, and we move back into the traffic of our daily round with the peace of the eternal in our step. How good it is to center down. Isn't that beautiful? Those words come from someone who is involved in action, involved in struggle. And I think those of us who have been out on the front lines at times in the struggle for justice and peace, we know that we can become part of the problem even as we're trying to be part of the solution. I'm working for peace, don't you understand? You know, I'm sick and tired of these people who don't have any compassion. So, in groups of 2 or 3, how might this approach to centering down enrich our work for social, political, economic, and environmental justice and peace? You don't have to have a well-formulated answer to this question, but just see what comes out if you start to talk about it. If we were, all of us who are out there engaged in the struggle, if we were more attuned to this practice of centering down, how would that make a difference in our work? Do you understand the question? Stan, you have about 3 minutes. Whoever is speaking now, when you finish your sentence, please have a seat. Now, for all of us who've been deeply influenced by Father Richard and Center for Action and Contemplation, we know that one of the capacities that's practiced through contemplation, one of the goals towards which descent leads is unitive consciousness or non-dual thinking. The sense of and not just a thought, but a feeling and an awareness of the reality of our deep connection. Our deep connection with ourselves, our deep connection with our bodies, our deep connection with the earth, our deep connection with other human beings, including the ones who don't like us and the ones we don't like, and including the animals and the plants and the rivers and the systems of this earth. And then you start to think in our connection to the sun, whose energy, we're all living on solar energy. And we start to feel this connection. Howard Thurman, who I introduced you to earlier, wrote these words: "A strange necessity has been laid upon me to devote my life to the central concern that transcends the walls that divide and would achieve in literal fact what is experienced as literal truth. Human life is one, and all persons are members of one another. And this insight is spiritual, and it is the hard core of religious experience." In another place he wrote, "It is my belief that in the presence of God there is neither male nor female, white nor black, Gentile or Jew, Protestant or Catholic, Hindu, Buddhist, nor Muslim, but a human spirit stripped to the literal substances of itself before God. Wherever man has this sense of the eternal in his spirit, he hunts for it in his home, in his work, among his friends, in his pleasures, and in all the levels of his function. It is my simple faith that this is the kind of universe that sustains that kind of adventure. And what we see dimly now in the churning confusion and chaos of our tempestuous times will someday be the common experience of all the children of men everywhere. Amen? I soak that in and I just, I want to sunbathe under that luminosity right there. This deep sense of our connection. I love that sentence. It is my simple faith that this is the kind of universe that sustains that kind of adventure. And remember, I read earlier, now if I hear the sound of the genuine in me, and if you hear the sound of the genuine in you, it is possible for me to go down in me and come up in you, so that when I look at myself through your eyes, having made that pilgrimage, I see in me what you see in me, and the wall that separates and divides will disappear, and we will become one, because the sound of the genuine makes that same music. I have an 8-year-old granddaughter. By the way, don't ask me how many grandchildren I have. I already embarrassed myself with my math earlier, but I have 5 grandchildren, and the oldest is 8. And we were on a pretty long drive 6 or 8 months ago. And so I had my playlist on, and the same singer who I was playing for you before, Andy Gullahorn, was playing, and went through his songs. And I really had this music on because I was trying to put my granddaughter to sleep for this long drive. And it's very peaceful music. She doesn't normally listen to peaceful singer-songwriter music. Her peers, their favorite song is It's Raining Tacos, if any of you know that song. And if you do, you'll not thank me for putting the tune in your mind right now. So the playlist is playing through, and I notice her eyes are still open, and she says, "Hey, Pop, would you go back to that song a couple songs before?" And I went back. She said, "No, not that one, before that. No, not that one, before that. That's the one." I want to play that song for you right now.
There's a mother who's idling in the elementary school pickup line, singing ooh. And a woman wearing a bright orange safety vest, blowing a whistle in time, singing ooh. And there's a man across the street at his front window lifting the blinds. See the kids filing out with their backpacks dragging behind, singing ooh. There's a couple staring into each other's eyes over their glasses of water, singing ooh. And a short order cook heading back to the grill to flip their burgers over, singing ooh. There's a woman with a missing front tooth and a crooked smile, counting the cash in her apron, getting ready for closing time, singing ooh. They're all singing. They're all singing. They're all singing the same song. There's a single father waiting for his kids to arrive for their monthly visit, singing ooh. And a woman walking around the gate picking up the the trash and abandoned papers, singing ooh. And a man in a camouflage jacket is holding his wife, and he's trying to convince her that it won't be their last goodbye. They're all singing. They're all singing. They're all singing the same song. Well, maybe you came with a sad melody ringing in your heart. Ooh. And maybe your notes are like flickers of hope trying to light the dark. Ooh. When I bring stories of my own from a broken life, but if we dare to open up to each other, I think we'll find that we're all singing. 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 We're all singing the same song. The same song. The same song.
That same granddaughter was visiting just a couple of weeks ago, and again we were driving in the car. This is 6 or 8 months later, and first thing she says when the car starts is, "Pop, Pop, remember that song I like?" And I just looked in the rearview mirror as she listened, and I thought her little 8-year-old mind and heart senses something there of our connection. You know, people are spending billions of dollars to divide us. Isn't it ironic? They want to win votes to govern cities or states or nations that they have just made hate one another. And so, can you see how people who learn to develop through the contemplative mind and heart the ability to see without otherizing and without turning people into the enemy, without letting the person you oppose become the person you hate? It would change everything. Listen, I have skin in the game. I'm involved with a number of different issues for which I'm passionately involved. And I know something. To do the work of social action means, in a certain sense, we have to look at people and say, are they oppressors? Are they bystanders? Are they the oppressed? Or are they allies? And this is pretty fundamental to the work of social justice. Because there really are oppressors, and there really are oppressed, and there really are bystanders who let it all go on, and there really are people ready to be recruited as allies, and all of this dynamic is going on. But is there a way for us to approach all four with the same love, inviting them into the same song? Do you understand what I'm saying? So, would you stand up, please, in groups of 2 or 3? How do you think we can do this? How do you experience this? Where do you go with this? You have about 3 minutes to grapple with that together. Whoever's speaking now, when you finish your sentence, please have a seat. Thanks, everybody. You're doing a great job. One of my mentors many years ago taught me that what you focus on determines what you miss. And many of us who grew up in especially Christian tradition like mine, it doesn't matter if you were Catholic or Protestant, we were taught to focus everything on the issue of heaven and hell, sin and forgiveness. Everything was about our greatest danger, which was an angry God. And in some ways, the contemplative life was sort of orbiting around that central focus. And for a lot of people, and again, I'm not saying there's no value to this. I know this has value and it's helped a lot of people, but a lot of the focus of contemplation was trying to get yourself pure enough so that God wouldn't be mad at you. And again, I'm not saying there's no value to that, but one of the great gifts that Howard Thurman brings, he not only wrote a book like Meditations of the Heart, which is about the inner life, he also wrote a book like Jesus and the Disinherited, in which he reads the Gospels as a black man in the first half of the 20th century who was living in the world of Jim Crow and segregation, American apartheid. And from that perspective, when he read the Gospels, he saw things that I had been trained to miss by being trained to focus on other things. And the feeling I've had from the blessing in my life of people who are different from me, from people who are not the descendants of the colonizers, but descendants of the colonized and the colonized themselves, from Latin American liberation theologians, from African and African American black theologians, and from Asian theologians who just come looking at the world from a whole different starting point. And one of the blessings I've gained is that when I read the Bible, they show me how to see all the things that I was trained to miss. And so when Howard Thurman read the Gospels from the position of a man who every day when he walked down the street, the gaze of the white majority was meant to remind him that he had to better keep in his place. He saw 4 themes: fear, deception, hate, and love. He realized that fear keeps the system going because the fear of punishment, the fear of being shamed, the fear of being disappeared, if you let that fear control you, your decision to give in to the fear is your decision to let the oppressors win. And he started seeing all through the Gospels how Jesus, an oppressed man speaking to oppressed people, is constantly giving them reasons to transcend the fear. Don't fear those who can destroy the body. Inviting people to, how often does he say, fear not, do not fear? Howard Thurman understood that the way that systems of oppression are sustained is through deception, all kinds of deceptions. The colonizers or the oppressors or the slaveholders or the elites deceiving themselves that they really deserve to be better than everybody else, and that the others deserve to be in the subdominant position. Or the deception that happens when different kinds of pleasantries are exchanged as if to make it sound like everything's okay between us, when really those pleasantries are just ways of keeping the current unjust status quo going. You understand that kind of deception? Howard Thurman read the Gospels, and he just saw Jesus puncturing those membranes of deception again and again. From let your yes be yes to your no be no. Get rid of this deception. To the lords of the Gentiles like to lord it over others and claim to be benefactors. See, Jesus saw through all that and aimed to puncture the deception. He understood, look, when you're oppressed, you feel hatred toward your oppressors. And that hatred, if that controls you, it can turn you into the next generation of oppressor. And then he understood that in some ways the oppressors hate those they oppress because they refuse to recognize their humanity. So he saw the power of these 3, and then he saw the power of Jesus' words to love your enemies. And so he focused on, he noticed fear, deception, hate, and love on every page. I was trained to not see those things as important. They just were invisible to me. Howard and others showed them to me. And the presence and power of revolutionary love to transcend deception, fear, and hate, it's just remarkable. So here's the question. What would happen if in our contemplative lives we paid a lot more attention to fear, to deception, to hate? What if in the making room in our hearts, we were very consciously making room for a revolutionary love? How would that enhance our contemplation, not to mention our work for justice and peace? 3 minutes, please. Whoever's speaking now, if you could finish your sentence, and then when you sit down, have silence. Let's pull back together. When Father Richard was speaking yesterday about that win-lose mindset, you know, in the struggle for social justice on whatever issue it might be, workers' rights, equal treatment for diversely abled persons, full inclusion for LGBTQ persons, men and women being treated as partners and equals, caring for this precious planet that's being so exploited and destroyed through human greed, ignorance, and carelessness, working for racial and religious reconciliation. Whatever the issue is that we're struggling with, do you understand that if we let deception, hate and fear dominate, it's going to pollute the process and the outcome of the very goods that we're seeking to achieve. And so that's why it becomes really important for those of us engaged in this work to be willing to do the hard and painful work of dissent. Centering down, in Howard Thurman's words, implies this descent, going below the superficial, beneath appearances, to the very depths. I wonder, do any of you have, by any chance, I know this might be really unusual to ask, but do any of you by any chance have a cell phone with you? So do you understand that we all carry a device within us that helps us at every waking moment to stay in touch with the superficiality of normal discourse? You can tap into any number of platforms that will help you realize the absolutely amazing capacity of human beings again and again to dive with all of their weight into the shallow end of the pool again and again and again. And you start to realize why we need people who are willing to say, here is an irreconcilable difference. How are we going to defeat it? Is it just going to be these people getting louder? Guess what? These people will get louder. These people get meaner. These people will get meaner. At some point you have to say, could we by any chance go down, descend, and try to see the deeper issues that are working underneath, the deeper motives that are working underneath? Could we try to descend? But here's the interesting thing about descent. As we center down, we see from underneath. We understand something when we're willing to look at it from the underside, not from the front or the top. You understand? We all present our best front. But when we are willing to look at the backside or the downside, the shadow, the weakness, the failure of our position. Look, probably most of you in the room identify as either a Republican or a Democrat or an independent. And you know what? You're very, very aware of the weaknesses of the other party and the strengths of yours, which I don't doubt are real. But how many people can speak as quickly about the weaknesses of their party and the strengths of the other? See, this is the kind of work that only happens when we're willing to go down from that superficial level in the path of descent, where we interrogate our virtues and we explore our shadows, individually and as communities. When we doubt our certainties and listen to our doubts because we seek underestimating our own power to be wrong. When our us-them dualisms and antagonisms are unified into us compassion. Sometimes it happens by saying, they are really a mess. I need to have compassion on them. And then you work at that a while, and then you realize, you know what, we're kind of a mess too. I need to have compassion on us. I guess I should just have compassion on everybody. That's dissent. We begin to see their kindness and insight, and our violence and blindness. We begin to see their abuses of power, and then we see the same abuses sometimes perpetuated by the person doing the observing. We see how we and they are both part of the problem and sickness and threat. And we start to suddenly realize we're all in this together. Oh, Protestants learn these aren't Catholic problems. They're Christian problems. Oh, these aren't just Buddhist or Hindu or Muslim or Christian problems. These are human problems. And when we descend to the level of naming and dealing with problems, they're problems of human evolution. They're problems of human neurobiology. They're problems of human culture. They're problems of human tradition. They're human problems that we all share. When we get down that deep, then suddenly now this issue isn't simply a problem of fixing them. It's realization that we must be and embody and incarnate the changes we seek. These changes have to come from the bottom up, from people who actually live them and hold them and mess them up, but care enough to say, well, I'm unhappy with my performance there, and we acknowledge that. We keep working at it. It's very different than thinking, oh, we'll just solve the problem if we can elect some different people to pass a law and impose them from the top down. I mean, as soon as I say it, don't you realize how stupid it is? But you're going to see a whole lot of TV commercials for the next politician who will solve this from the top down. Oh my gosh, brothers and sisters, do you see the tragedy that we have 300 and some 100,000 Christian churches in North America who aren't taking seriously this work of the inner journey of transformation, where we realize if we want there to be peace out there, there has to be peace in here. If the things that make for peace out there are lacking, then forgiveness, reconciliation, non-dual consciousness, these have to be things that more and more exist inside of actual human bodies. We want justice to be out there. Justice is about the use of power. We better start paying attention to how we're using power. We want economic justice out there. What are the conditions inside a human soul that lead to economic justice? How can those be developed in here? We want a peaceful and beautiful outer ecology. It won't happen unless more and more people, some critical mass of people, start attending to their inner ecology. So I don't mean to be rude. I'm not accusing anybody here. But there is a kind of contemplative spirituality that looks a lot like spiritual affluence. What do you give to the person who has everything? More peace of mind. God bless Thich Nhat Hanh, who saw this in the Buddhist world, and he created something very much like the Center for Action and Contemplation, the Center for Engaged Buddhism, to say that if we're seeking for mindfulness and inner peace within, it has to be connected to the outside world. Otherwise, conferences like this will just become a religious luxury product for the contemplative class. But if we start to understand what we're really dealing with here, it's a matter of survival for the human species and the planetary ecosystem it threatens. As Dr. King said, the night before he was killed, the choice is no longer violence or nonviolence. It's nonviolence or non-existence. In groups of 2 or 3, once more, if Dr. King's words are true, how can we become, in the best and truest sense of the word, evangelists? Do you know what I'm talking about? I don't mean in the shallow, shabby sense, but people who are inviting others into this path of saying, let's do our inner work to be the change we wish to see in the world. I'd like you to see what comes out if you start talking about that to somebody. You've got 3 minutes, please. Whoever's speaking now, when you finish your sentence, please have a seat in silence. So we've talked about silence and centering and connection and focus and descent. And there's one last thing I want to mention before we take a break. And again, it's Howard Thurman who says this so beautifully. One of his probably best known statements, which I don't think anyone has ever found in print, but has been attributed to him. Don't ask yourself what the world needs. Ask yourself what makes you come alive, and then go do that, because what the world needs is people who have come alive. This quality of aliveness, of deep joy, of not living by the scripts of authoritarian logic, of not letting your life be pulled by the strings of other people, but have centered down to the place where you hear the voice of the genuine. This way of life unleashes great joy. And ironically, the path to transformation is the path of descent, and the path to joy ends up being the path not trying to grasp upward for happiness, but looking for what's genuine. You come to joy. And joy is really important, it turns out, in the work of social justice. I know this is very hard to relate to, but there was a period in biblical history, it's in the book of Nehemiah, when the whole nation had basically ruined everything. The older generation had ruined things, and the younger generation is trying to pick up the pieces. And things are so bad. And they have this big assembly, and everybody's so depressed, and they all start to cry. Now, I know it's hard to imagine for things being bad enough that you feel like crying. And I know it's hard to imagine a world where older people have messed things up and left a mess for the next generation. I know it's hard to imagine. In the old days, this sort of thing happened. And the spiritual leaders get up and they say to the people, please stop crying. Go make yourself a good meal. Pour yourself a stiff drink. You got to be happy, people, because the joy of the Lord is your strength. If you want to rebuild this damaged and destroyed nation, if you want to help resurrect and restore the soul of the nation, the strength you need comes from joy. And so I want to use some beautiful poetry written by Dr. B and in her beautiful book, Joy Unspeakable, that I just feel is the best way to end this session. Joy unspeakable erupts when you least expect it, when the burden is greatest, when the hope is gone after the bullets fly. It rises on the crest of impossibility. It sways to the rhythm of steadfast hearts and celebrates what we cannot see. Joy unspeakable is not silent. It moans, hums, and bends to the rhythm of a dancing universe. It is a fractal of transcendent hope, a hologram of God's heart, a black hole of unknowing. For the tap-dancing boogie-woogie, rap, rock, blues, griots who also hear God, Joy unspeakable is that space-time joy continuum thing that dares us to play and pray in the interstices of life. It is the belief that the phrase "the art of living" means exactly what it says. Joy unspeakable is both fire and cloud, the unlikely merger of trance and high-tech lives, ecstatic songs and a jazz repertoire. Joy unspeakable is a symphony of incongruities, of faces aglow and hearts on fire, and the wonder of surviving together. And so I'm not going to give you time now to talk about this question, but maybe over the break as you take a walk or over dinner tonight, you might share an experience where you found joy in social action or in contemplation or in both together. I'd like to just close by sharing one such experience. I live in Florida, and so the Parkland shooting happened about 2 hours from where I live, and I've been very exercised about the issue of violence ever since people like Howard Thurman and others helped me look at the Bible differently. I now realize that the essence of sin in the early chapters of Genesis isn't just Eve eating an apple, it's Cain killing his brother with a weapon. And so violence really is a theme of the whole Bible. And so I've been concerned about this, and on so many different levels. So you may remember, after the Parkland shooting came the March for Our Lives, and in the little town where I live, I'm pretty keyed in with the activist community, and so there was going to be a March for Our Lives gathering, and I expected 700 or 800 people on the optimistic side. And I showed up, and there were probably about 1,000 people when I showed up. We planned to meet in this park, and then we were going to march around 4 blocks and then come back into the park and have a rally. I was near the end of the line, and by the time my part of the line was leaving the park, the other part of the line was coming back into the park. The line stretched 4 blocks. Nobody knows exactly how many, but I've heard estimates from 4,000 to 7,000 people came together. And I remember standing at the back of the park and looking at this crowd so much bigger than I expected. Old people, young people, brown people, white people, black people, all different kinds of people there. I'm sure there were a lot of Republicans and a lot of Democrats and a lot of independents who don't want to see kids killed in school. And this big crowd of people are there. And then the organizers, it was organized by high school students. And 3 high school students gave talks. Now, I want to tell you something. What I'm about to say is no false humility. I'm telling you my honest, absolute feeling. Those 3 high school students gave a better talk than I have ever given in my life. They spoke with authenticity and genuineness and passion and wisdom. And I stood at that gathering and I looked over those thousands of people and I watched those kids up there, and something in me rose in joy. After the bullets had been flying, I said, I can't give up hope. I can't become cynical. I can't become a bitter old fart complaining about how bad things are. Something in me rose up and said, we keep going when we descend and let the rivers of living water flow up with joy from our innermost being. Amen? Take a break. Thanks.